Again, a deliberately provocative view here, the airplane over lower Manhattan. I try to undermine any specific reference with this kind of nostalgic black and white treatment. But this is the way that most of us will enter and exit the cities that we now visit, if we visit them. And again, I think it's worth remembering how recent an experience this is. I was in Holland a few weeks ago, and I said, you know, it's really interesting to, in a sense, go back to the 19th century, whereby you enter cities at the center, getting off a train, which is an experience that we almost never have anymore. I mean, Via Rail would like us to take the train to Montreal or Ottawa from Toronto or to Windsor, but it's just still a rarity in the large distances of North America and the rest of the transatlantic, trans-Pacific world. We enter the city from the perimeter. We enter laboriously, sometimes from miles away, trying to make our way into the city from the landing site. What gives New York, and especially Manhattan, this presence as a symbolic capital? Well, one thing that's obvious is the presence of the grid pattern. And the grid pattern is not just a street plan. The grid pattern is a mode of thought. It is an argument. In particular, it's an argument about capital, because what it does is divide the geography into uniform parcels to make them commodities for sale. And the uniformity of the parcel is part of the commodification of the geography. But a couple of things to notice from this, this old view of Lower Manhattan. First and First is only there, at First Street and First Avenue. And it's a reminder of how much of, almost a quarter of the island of Manhattan lies below the grid. In the sense that the grid has sort of been imposed from above and pushes down to the foot of Manhattan. And what you see here is mini grids or subgrids that orient themselves more rationally to the shore of the East River there and the Hudson there, and create these kinds of, we think of them now as atypical Manhattan streets, which are on the diagonal or squished. And this is a reminder, in a way, of a kind of developmental progression from the chaos and disorder, as it might be seen, of the lowest part of Manhattan up to the Cartesian rationality of the grid pattern here. It always reminds me in a different way of the way Mordecai Richler writes about the Maine, Boule Saint-Laurent in Montreal, and how as you progress up from the river's edge, you go up in class. So that as people got off boats, the people who were not able to ascend to nicer areas stayed there, and the richer people were up there. But the ethnic groupings that are situated that way change over time. So where it once was the Jews from Europe, later it is Italians, later still it is Chinese and Taiwanese, etc. Just a quick view from the street to remind us that this is what it looks like. The density of Manhattan, of course, is another feature of its centrality. It was, because of the geographical bounds of the island, the place where the skyscraper really had to be invented, the tall building. And what you see here are some old walk-up buildings. These are buildings without elevators. And for a long time, before the invention of the Otis safety elevator, the scale of density was limited by what? By the human body. And it's another important point to remember, that even when architects and urban planners wished to build tall, they had to remember that after 6 or 7 flights of climbing stairs, people have heart attacks. And when I was living in New York, I was dating a woman who lived on the 6th floor of an old walk-up on the West Side. And I lost about 15 pounds because it takes it out of you going up all those stairs. There's the Woolworth. This is 1911. And what's interesting to note about this is an example of a hybrid form. You see here standard kind of Beaux-Arts neoclassical elements in the design just chunked into a big volume here. And then this spire, which takes 1/4 of the available footprint and creates a very odd silhouette. But what I love about this image is that this is a postcard I found from 1913, and in a barn in New Hampshire. And scribbled, I don't know if you can make it out there, but scribbled in fountain pen on the top is a line through the observation tower that says 570 odd feet, 55th story, was up this last winter. And what I love about this is that this, first of all, a noteworthy experience at the time, worth writing home about, that one had gone up this. And that then it extends the imaginary reach of the city well beyond the physical limits of the city. And this little piece of ephemera, a kind of media representation in a way, which now, 100 years later, we are inundated with these kinds of representations. This was an attempt to send the city out past its physical limits. Cities have a kind of unconscious that exists in these underground places. In New York, which is the great palimpsest city, there are all kinds of caverns that can be excavated, especially in lower Manhattan. Places that have been built over, and you go down and somebody has a backhoe and they smash through and find brick from 1895 or earlier. So cities are built up in this sedimentary way over time. And as Freud says in Civilization and Its Discontents, underneath the surface of things in the city is where we find the memory, sometimes repressed, of what it was. A center of a city can be something like this. This is what I think of as the heart of Manhattan, not just me, obviously. The Grand Concourse and Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan, 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. This is from a famous series of images. You've probably seen them used in graphic design. The reason I include this is because it's a reminder. This is the famous information kiosk with the clock. And it reminded me of a philosophy argument made by a colleague some years ago. And it had to be some years ago, because clearly this is an example from before the cell phone era. And he said, imagine that you were lost in New York and you were trying to meet a friend and had no way of getting in touch with that friend. What would you do? And he said, as he polled various people about this, it became clear that most people said they would go here at noon every day until the friend figured out that that was the right answer. And what I love about this is that, in a sense, we respond to this because it is the right answer. Right? It is the right answer. This is the meeting place. This is the agora, the crossroads. And the normativity contained in that rightness is not prescriptive. Nobody says, here's the rule. Visitors to New York, make sure you know this is the right answer. But it rather exists in a kind of shared consciousness about the way a city works. Nowadays, of course, it's not clear that there is such an answer, and that's part of what we need to think about as we go forward.